How many of you have ever experienced being alone? Okay, so you can actually physically put your hand up, virtually put your hands up, put a message in the chat box, however you wish to interact. How many of you have ever experienced feeling lonely? Okay. Again, I see lots of hands going up. How many of you have never ever experienced being lonely or alone? Okay, so it feels like this is a pretty universal experience. So who am I, firstly? Before we get into the subject matter, my name is Neil Shah. I run an international non-profit organisation called the Stress Management Society that I founded 20 years ago. And we also run a research and consultancy organisation called International Wellbeing Insights. Over the last 20 years, we've had the opportunity to reach more than 100 million people with the various different campaigns and programmes and sort of awareness drives that we've been involved with. And I'd like to think we've got a pretty good understanding of the human experience. And I'm very grateful that I'm part of an organisation that has been able to make a difference, particularly as the world seems to get more challenging and more demanding every day. I'm also grateful that through that, it's given my life a reason, a purpose, a meaning. But just to qualify to qualify why I am able to stand here and have this discussion with you, it's not just professional expertise. It's not just the things I've experienced and the things I've been involved with. I started this organisation off the back of a breakdown, which happened in 2003, which ultimately led me getting to a point where I was so low, I decided I wanted to check out, and I actually attempted to end my own life. Interestingly, that part of the story, the final part of the story of attempting to end my own life, only happened, the first time I shared it, should I say, was about 5 years ago, 15 years after it happened. That was my deep, dark secret. Even though at that point I'd been involved with a variety of different campaigns and projects and programs to be able to help other people, I'd never really shared my truth because I was embarrassed of it. And given the fact that the 10th of September was Suicide Prevention Day, and this week is marked as Suicide Prevention Week, we wanted to have a discussion to really ensure we are starting to remove the guilt, shame and stigma associated with poor mental health and suicidality. And I'm not here just to share expertise, I'm also here to share with you my journey and my experience, and also what I've been able to witness over the years. I'm very happy to be joined today by Joey Kolirin, who is a public speaker and an advocate. He's been doing some amazing work about raising kind of awareness around poor mental health. And he's also got a personal mission to empower people to persevere and break down barriers to get the support they need. Welcome, Joey. Thank you for being here today. Do you want to just give us a bit of background and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate your time. And Neil, thank you, of course, for inviting me. I come from a very challenging background. Obviously, there's a big discussion on nature and nurture with mental health. My personal view, it's actually a bit of both. And probably also about 20 years ago, my health really started to decline massively. So I'm 38 now. Looking back on it and back over my life, it was bubbling away in a negative spiral for long before that, but it only became disruptive, which is the key for me. Yeah, I couldn't hide it any longer. It was disrupting my life. I was not able to move forward with day-to-day activities and things like that, that I first started to seek help. However, only in the last 4 years have I gone through a process of what I call coming out, not referring to sexuality, but it's a very similar concept. Again, big dark secret. It was like Superman. The only difference was my power wasn't flying and being able to see through things and saving the world. My power was basically that I'm a piece of crap and everyone's going to hate me and I'm alone and I don't deserve to be here. So since that journey, it's been very enlightening. I get to have opportunities like this, meet fantastic people. But I very much want to stress I'm absolutely in no way, shape or form a finished product. The reason I do these things, and a lot of the time I do them for no cost, I don't charge, is because I'm just very passionate about it. And my number one thing is really that what you see is not what you get with people. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how people feel, regardless of the experience that, you know, individuals like Neil and I might have. I'm not comparing myself to Neil, by the way. Neil's done a lot, but regardless of experience, you still don't know what someone's going through. And I feel my place here on earth is to unearth those things, but not to make people feel uncomfortable, to do the total opposite, to give them support, to build commonality, to know that it's okay. And a lot more people are in that position or experience those things than you realise. And yeah, I don't want to talk too much, so I'll leave it there. That's my intro. But yeah, thanks for having me.
You're most welcome, actually. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. And these kind of conversations are for me, what really can inspire change. What I find fascinating, we run one of these webinars every month. It's kind of like a podcast stroke webinar stroke workshop. And we run one every month on a different topic, on a different theme. And the last couple we've had between 600 and 800 people attend. You'll be able to see from the top bar, at the moment, we've got 32 people that have attended this session. So the session we are running to mark Suicide Awareness Day and Suicide Awareness Week is the lowest attending. This is how we know we have work to do, because there is still so much guilt, shame, and stigma associated with the subject. Now, a lot more people will watch it as a recording, but the fact is, when we are offering space to have these challenging and uncomfortable conversations, because of the guilt, shame, and stigma associated with it, and also the fact that a lot of people may turn around and reflect on the subject matter and think, well, that's not for me, not something I'm interested in, or even something I'm willing to admit. So I find this really interesting, given the scale of the issue and how much it's affecting our global population, that whenever we offer space to have these discussions, they are much less attended than when we have conversations in other areas. So firstly, before we get to that, we do have 33 people here. Do you want to just put into the chat box, guys, where are you from? Let's just get a sense of kind of the global spread, who we've got and from where. So it'd be lovely if you could just pop your name in and where you're from in the world, just to get a sense of where we're from. So we've got representation from Lincolnshire in the UK. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And welcome, Gerard. So if you just want to drop in where you're from, let's see how much of a spread we've got. We've got someone that's an early starter from New Jersey in the USA. Welcome. We've got a lot of people in sort of the Lancashire area, in around the UK. So fantastic. Ireland. So welcome, everybody. So it's a pleasure to have you all here. So as I've already mentioned, that we are here to mark two occasions. So Suicide Prevention Day was on Sunday, and the week that started on Sunday runs through till Saturday this weekend. This is a big issue. In fact, I'd go as far as saying it's one of the biggest issues that we are experiencing on the planet today, yet the one that we are most uncomfortable talking about. 1 in 5 people have suicidal thoughts. 1 in 14 people self-harm. 1 in 15 people attempt suicide. Got 115 people that die by suicide in the UK every week. That's 1 every 85 minutes, with 75% of those being men. In the UK, the North East has the highest suicide rate, which is the same as previous years. You know, I don't want to go through the numbers because they're just astonishing. It's the leading cause of death of people aged between 15 and 29 in the UK. There was a recent study that was showing 25% of people under the age of 25 over the last 3 years have experienced suicidal thoughts. 4 times as many US military personnel die as a result of their own hand than from active combat. So people that actually put their lives on the lives on the line for a living are more likely to die as a result of their own hand. That was a shocking statistic. In Japan, in October 2020, more people took their life than died from COVID the whole year. Yet the news stories and the social media channels were dominated by stories of one issue, but people dying of another issue didn't even get any kind of comment. So this for me suggests that there are some issues that get more light of day because maybe they've got more political or commercial leverage. Why is it that people who are suffering and dying as a result of mental health don't get as much attention as those that die from other reasons? Why is this issue less valued or less comfortable to the point we won't even discuss it? To the point where when we offer spaces like this where people don't turn up. So this is part of the problem. When we start talking about it and reaching people long before it becomes a more serious issue, hopefully we can start putting less people into the ground unnecessarily. Because sadly, many people that die as a result of their own hand may not have comorbidities, may not have other issues. They could potentially have a long and fruitful life in front of them. And we aren't doing anywhere near enough to support people or to destigmatize a subject that is affecting so many of us. Joe, I'm sure you're familiar with these statistics. I'm sure you're familiar with the scale of the issue. What is your reading and what is your perceptions as to why we're still not comfortable having conversations on an uncomfortable subject like suicide?
I think a lot of it's spoken about, but not actually adopted. So I work in the energy industry. I have a lot of clients who say, for example, I want green energy. I say to them, just out of interest, do you actually care about the environment, or do you want a certificate saying that you care about the environment? And I think there's still a similar thing going on here. I do also think there's a generational gap. So my in-laws, and I know a lot of people, there's common jokes about people not getting on with their in-laws. I get on with them very, very well. They're lovely people, but they come from a very different place that I come from. They've, inverted commas, never had anything wrong with them. In their family, they all live till they're 250 years old, and they don't get illnesses. I come from a family where people die. There's suicide in my family. There's depression. So for as much as I educate them on this subject and talk to them about it, again, I don't mean to make this specific I'm not trying to dig them out. I'm just talking about the generic subject. There's just a lack of understanding. So part of it, I think, is a bit like greenwashing. People, will say our organisation is, we're really behind this movement, battling depression and helping people. I'm not sure if they all are. I'm not suggesting everyone's that way, but I just don't think as many people are what they say they are. Number two, I think there's a big distinct lack of understanding with certain generations or certain cultures. And number three, which is very specifically why I've got into this field, is leading cause of death among people aged in 15 to 29. Well, the biggest acute phase of my life was during that period. So I'm almost looking at saying, phew, I've overcome that. And I've not escaped it. But part of that, and also being linked to males, is society-driven words. Man up. A lot of my friends got married over the last 10 years. And they all take the piss out of me because on a stag do, I'm the first one in bed. I don't drink. And it's because actually I find it extremely challenging to go. And a lot of them are like, well, it's drinking. We can take other stuff. We can do this. We can do, whatever it is, strippers and fun. And to me, it just brings about a lot of anxiety. So the point, again, not to make that personal to me, but there's a society-driven thing about a stag do, about manning up. And I think they're very, very dangerous, difficult things to break down.
And this is interesting because some of the cultural phrases we have, particularly in the UK, for those from outside the UK, you may have heard phrases such as "soldier on," "pull your socks up and get on with it," "man up," "grown men don't cry." As with many of these kind of common cultural phrases, people don't often understand the origin. Even like a simple nursery rhyme like "Ring a ring of roses," most people don't appreciate that comes from the bubonic plague. A lot of the phrases that we're referring to right now are actually Second World War phrases, where you had to soldier on and pull your socks up and get on with it and man up, because the consequence of not doing so could have been dire for all of us. But do they still serve us in 2023? And this is where the people that do just soldier on and pretend like everything's okay and paper over the cracks are the ones that we often hear about, where it's like, but they were always so happy, they were always so positive. And then they're not here anymore because you couldn't really see their truth because they couldn't express it because of the fear of the consequences of doing so. Because still in modern society, vulnerability is seen as a weakness. And, you know, whether you agree with everything she says or not, there are a couple of things that Brené Brown has shared that are very powerful. And it's the reframing of vulnerability. For me, there's one thing I do agree with her on, which is vulnerability is not just a strength, it's a superpower. It's the strong amongst us that can put their hands up and say, you know what, yes, I'm struggling, I'm compromised, and I'm going to own that, and I'm going to seek out the help, rather than pretending like everything's okay. Which is why I'm really grateful that, you know, Joey, you're here and willing to share your story, because that is part of your superpower, your willingness to be authentic. And as more of us do so, we are automatically giving others permission to do the same. That's why it took me 15 years to get to the point where I was comfortable sharing my story. But now I know that every time I do, there might be even one person out there that hears that story and thinks to themselves, well, if Neil can do it, then so can I. And this is where we need to start reframing this and offering a different narrative, particularly to the younger generations that are growing up in a world that's pretty much an episode of Black Mirror. The world's a crazy place right now. You literally couldn't have made up the things that happened over the last 3 years. You know, from the pandemic to the economic crash to war in Ukraine. I've just seen Marina is actually joining us from Ukraine. Welcome, Marina. To you know, the heat waves and the wars and the energy crisis. And over the last couple of years, I used to joke about, based on the current trajectory, whoever's writing the script, the next thing that naturally is going to happen is aliens will attack, right? Because it just felt like a ridiculous thing to say. Some of you may be aware that right now, as we speak, there's a US Senate committee hearing going on about declassifying all the information the US government has on UFOs, or what they call UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and non-human biologics, which basically means alien bodies. Now, that sounds crazy. And in any other world, in any other time frame, the world would have stopped and everyone would have, jaws would have dropped to the ground at the thought that the US government is about to admit that not only do they know about aliens, but they've got evidence. But I recently was on a call with a client from the US, a couple of hundred people on the call, and I mentioned that, and people said, you know what, I can't care about aliens when I've got to pay the mortgage and I've got work deadlines and we've got a situation where we've got an opioid crisis in the US and et cetera, et cetera. It's so low down the priority. It's the kind of things that when we watch these Hollywood movies would have put the world to a standstill, don't even register a blip anymore. And for me, this is what is scary. Is getting anxious is worrying. When people have a strong anxiety response, obviously that is not good. But when people go further than anxiety to apathy, that's even more scary. Because that's the point where people stop caring, and the knock-on effects of that is when people stop caring because it's like it can't get any worse, and I've just given up. Is where we see the kind of statistics we're seeing on the screen, and I know that because I've been there. Is you get to the point where you just stop caring, you give up. The pain of dealing with daily life is so great that any solution to stop that pain is enough, and this is for me the biggest concern. Is not the, you know, the kind of things that we saw a few years ago as a lot of people going into anxiety and panic and high levels of stress. People are starting to give up. So, you know, let's kind of put this out there. Why is this such a big issue? And we'd love to hear from some of our audience today. And, you know, also feel free to jump on the mic. What we do ask, if you are coming on the mic, please put your camera on as well so we can see you. What are your thoughts on this, on why this is such a big issue, why we've got to this point where it's unnecessarily robbing us of so many lives, particularly young lives? Why are people getting to the point where they don't feel they can carry on anymore? Who would like to share? And as I said, like, you know, please feel free to unmute yourself and jump on and share your thoughts and perspectives. You don't need to ask for permission, so just unmute yourself. Joe and myself would love to hear from you. And as we've already mentioned, you know, vulnerability is a strength, so it doesn't necessarily need to be your perspective. It could be your observations.
I think we get a false picture painted by social media and by everything that we watch on TV, that tends to then, when you reflect upon your own life, it makes you think, gosh, I'm a complete, failure because I work really hard, but I've not got 5 Bentleys and a helicopter, and I don't look like that image of that person on Instagram. So I think there's a lot of comparison that, in a negative way. I also think that the media likes to sensationalize bad feeling things. So it's more often, even with the weather, sort of like UK is going to be battered by rain alert, blah, blah, blah. And it's all stuff that wants to make you have a negative response or feel anxious.
Absolutely, Joe. I totally agree with that. I'd love to get Joey's thoughts on that, but I just want to share something directly to that point. There's a gentleman called Mo Gaudat. Mo Gaudat basically was the head of Google X, so the part of Google that kind of works on all the black ops kind of projects, like Google Maps and the cars that drive themselves, etc. And he had a bit of a tragic experience where he was living in Dubai, and his son had come to visit him from California on a break from university. I had a bit of a medical emergency. It was a routine thing, but due to a series of medical mistakes, his son sadly died at the age of 20. That's obviously a very, very tough and challenging experience to cope with as a parent. But rather than choosing to allow that to sink into depression, he decided he made a choice to use that to empower him onto a bit of a philosophical journey. The net result of it is he's written a book on happiness, and he came up with a formula, an equation for happiness. And his equation for happiness is where your life experience is equal to or greater than your expectations. So I'll say that again. Your life experience is equal to or greater than your expectations. Sadly, for many of us, particularly in Western society, what's described as weird countries. So weird is not me being mean to a country. It's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries where misery seems to be extremely high, where mental health issues and suicidality is a major concern. I would completely agree with what you've shared there, Joe. Many of us have expectations of what our life should look like, what we should have in our life, what we should be experiencing, which is far greater than our actual experience because of the programming from social media, from Instagram, from TikTok, etc., etc. So most of us are miserable, whereas we found that people that are living in more kind of indigenous cultures, or often what are described as blue zones, areas of the world where people are living quite long lives, on average to the age of 100. But many of these places are environments where they don't have hospitals and pharmacies, they don't have Amazon Prime and supermarkets and everything at a fingertip. So how is it that they are happier, healthier, and living longer than we are? Well, firstly, there's something to do with expectations, but there's another thing. They have a very strong sense of community, that people look out for each other. Again, something that we are really lacking in our so-called Western society. London's one of the most populous cities in the world. There's 8 million of us, yet it was recently voted as the loneliest city on the planet. That's, for me, very concerning, that you are constantly around people, that we are never lonely. Sorry, we are never alone, but we are feeling lonely. Lonely is not a lack of people, it's a lack of connection. Being alone is the physical act of not having people around you. Another point you raised there about good news and bad news. I remember when I was a kid, you watched a news program, the last item on the news story, the news program would be a good news story. So something like, the fireman rescued the cat from up the tree or something like that. They kind of got rid of that. They don't finish on a good news story. So it's basically all doom, death, devastation, destruction, disease, war, whatever. So we're constantly being told of how bad things are and what's bad and what's to be scared of and what's to be fearful of. But is that accurately reflecting reality? My experience is it isn't. The world is filled with equal amounts of amazing, wonderful, incredible things. Human beings doing beautiful things to change the face of this planet and support each other. Why do we not hear about those anywhere near enough? And if you start to believe the narrative that the world is filled with doom, death, devastation, and destruction, you start to believe that to the point where you lose hope that things can get better. And I genuinely believe there are a lot of people losing hope because we're being programmed that the world's a horrible place. I genuinely don't believe that. And Joey, what's your thoughts? Obviously, there's two things there about kind of expectations and around the information that we're exposed to. What's your reading on this?
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of things, and my brain was like, oh, I could comment on that. So I'll try and recall it. But first thing I'd say is a very famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. Quick synopsis of it: it's people that were in the Holocaust, which some have described literally as hell on earth, you know. And the Holocaust was split between working camps and death camps, and death camps were literally factories to die. So you come in, you're given your time, you go to a chamber, and that's it, you're dead. And this book is basically about how people manage to find solace in that situation, or manage to find hope in that situation. You know, your time is numbered and you're around a nation that wants to kill. How did they manage to find hope? Conversely, again, just to use my own scenario, I'm a father of two. I've got one on the way. I have a wife, I have a family, I have a job, I've got a car, I've got a house, I've got this, I've got that. Yet I spend a lot of my life feeling lonely and by myself. So I go back to things aren't what they seem. A phrase I use is analysis paralysis, compare and despair. You know, looking upon others, well, they've got this and they've got that. Myself as an individual, I don't take compliments very well. I don't say that for attention. It's the genuine truth. Now, I don't like the way I look. I don't like things about my personality. Even on this call, I'm talking and then I'll critique what I'm saying. But someone else might come to me and say, do you know what? Great talk. You know, Neil said to me before, I've heard very good things about you. Great talk. I'm thinking, oh, no, push it away, push it away, push it away. The point I'm making is Neil has got a perception from someone else who's complimented me. Yeah. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, they've just complimented me because they're my friend. It's just completely taken down. And where I'm leading on to is the number one thing that's helped me is learning about the 12 thinking distortions. I won't run through all of them. You can put it into Google. But exactly what Neil touched on, we are indoctrinated. We have learned behaviours. You know, I didn't come out of my mother's womb being negative. I just didn't. I may be predisposed to it because I have suicide in my family, depression, all the rest of it. But I have grown up in an environment which has taught me to be that way. And the one of the thinking distortions is black and white thinking. Yeah, so for me, I've got issues with my weight, issues as in my head with my weight. A lot of people think I'm in brilliant shape. A lot of people won't. Everyone's got a different opinion. They're entitled to it. But the thing is, in my mind, it's very black and white. Yeah, I'm overweight, I'm disgusting, therefore I'm fat, I don't deserve to be seen. Yeah, sadly, I have to have my camera on because I'm one of the speakers on this. But the point is, perception is different to reality. And if you Google 12 thinking distortions and can invest a bit of time saying, do you know what my brain's telling me? I feel lonely, but I might not actually be alone. There's a very big disconnect between what your brain is telling you or what external sources are telling you to what reality is. And for me, understanding that, just finish on this note particularly, but understanding, you know, gaining an understand, you know, they always say step one is accepting you have a problem, right? Understanding that, do you know what, I feel like shit, and I know I look like this, I hate myself, I blah 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 blah, negative. Some of that might be true, but some of that might have come from external factors which have gone through Joey's negative filters, yeah, which is experience, learned behaviors and so on and so forth. So I really do think it's key, although it's so obvious, things are not what they seem. And all the fallen heroes you see in the news, all these public figures that end up, you know, with atrocities in jail, there are many other people like that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be extreme. You know, Oscar Pistorius competing in the Olympics, then murdering someone, or manslaughter, whatever you want to call it. It's not always extreme, but stuff's going on for all different people. And even the people that you think, you know, they've got the 5 Bentleys or whatever the phrase was, they've made it. Not what they might have, but they might not. They might be terribly unhappy. So, yeah, for me, it's very much learning that my brain tricks me.
And you just want to reflect on something you said there, is perception is different from reality, which I agree with. However, for many people, their perception is their reality. What goes on in their mind, they believe it. So it becomes their reality. What you conceive and believe is what you will achieve. Now, that works in both the positive and the negative. If you believe the world is a dark, devastating, destructive place, you are right. And your brain, there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system, will look for evidence to justify that notion. And if you look for something, you will find it. You will negatively hallucinate out the evidence that the world's an amazing place. And you will seek out the evidence that supports the narrative you created internally. The reverse is also true. If you think the world is an incredible, wonderful, amazing place, when something devastating happens around you, you'll find a way to overcome that and seek out the things that justify the internal notion. When I was a kid, I used to read a comic book called The Beano. The comics, those kind of comics have gone out of fashion. So, younger people on the call may not remember that. But in The Beano, there was a character called Calamity James. And Calamity James, basically, to give you an idea, he had a black cloud of rain always above his head, wherever he was, blue sky, sunshine everywhere else. His best friend was a lemming. And he'd be walking down the street and there would be a bag of diamonds, a gold bar, a big cream cake, like, big piles of chocolate. All the things that he wanted were all around him, but he could never see them. And only bad things happened to him because he'd programmed his mind for that. So this is part of the challenge that we face. Many of us, sadly, because of the information we're exposed to or are exposing ourselves to, we are being programmed in a particular way, which we're now starting to see what the outcomes of that are. We've been for a period over the last couple of years, which partly I was joking about being an episode of Black Mirror. But if you bought into and believed all the information that you're exposed to, that's going to give you a pretty dark outlook on life. Gerard, firstly, I just want to acknowledge you sharing your experience and the tragic loss of your son. I'm devastated to hear that. I had the same experience with one of my best friends during the pandemic, who basically ended up going through an experience where he lost everything. And I was actually speaking to him pretty regularly, and I knew he was in a tough place. And there was a point, sort of mid-February, towards the end of February last year, where I just stopped hearing from him. I was literally calling him every day. I was messaging him, just wasn't getting a response. And that went on for about 5 or 6 days. And we were supposed to be catching up, a group of friends having a group call. He didn't show up for it, and he never doesn't show up. And we were actually meeting the following weekend to go away on a little retreat together. And sadly, the same thing had happened. He had lost everything. His business was gone. The person was in a relationship with, it ended up disintegrating because of the challenge he was going through. And he got to the point where, we'll never know exactly, but it kind of on the face of it was that he'd lost all aspects of his life that he felt defined him. These stories, sadly, are more common than I wish they were. The amount of people I've heard sharing such similar experiences from friends or family members or colleagues. So this is really where, and what you're sharing is it's like being on a bad diet. You keep feeding yourself bad food, you're going to gain weight. You keep putting in bad information, then that's obviously going to have an impact on how you feel about the world around you. What are you consuming? And is what you're consuming nourishing your soul? Michelle, sorry, a few minutes ago, I think you were about to share something. Would you still like to share? So it's Michelle Bailon, I believe. Hey, Michelle.
Hi. Sorry, I was just going to say it's about perception and, how everybody else's life is so great and you feel that yours isn't. And I think it's just the loss of connection that we have with people around us. I mean, you can live next door to somebody and not, really know them. And I think we've lost that, and it's really important that we try and embrace it. And that's why there's so many, people who are struggling. They feel that they're all alone, and the only way out is to, take their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just my thought on it.
And you know, it's a good segue to what I wanted to talk about. One of the things that has come up is exactly what you just shared there, Michelle, is people feeling isolated, disconnected. I think that there was a research study that was published a couple of years ago. This was actually pre-pandemic. It was suggesting more than 75% of people in London don't know their next door neighbours. You know, a city where I live, where there are so many people around you, but because of the pace of life and the demands and kind of the social structures that we have, a lot of people don't have the time or the energy to get to know the people around them. There are many people that do feel disconnected and isolated. And we've already established being lonely and alone are not the same thing. You know, being alone is having no one else present. Being lonely is that sense of sadness, isolation, disconnection. And you can have that in a room with 1,000 other people. Equally, you can be completely by yourself on the top of a mountain in a cave and there's not a person for 100 miles and you can still feel a sense of connection and not feel loneliness. Does that make sense? And this is really where one of the things that I think has contributed to this is anti-social media. I know they call it social media. For me, anti-social media is a much better definition because actually it's taking us away from what human beings are designed for, which is a sense of community, which is people coming together. I was at a festival this weekend and in the evenings, people gather by a fire and sing and talk and discuss and debate. And it was beautiful, but we've been doing that for tens of thousands of years. Social media's been around for 20 years and we've seen society turning on each other. And the level of polarity that I see on the planet today is greater than I've ever seen before. And, you know, for me, this is where we've lost our ability to have discussions, to debate, discuss, have discourse that allows us to find solutions to the things that we face. I can't see your name, but you've got your hands up. It's Gran something or the other. Grant. There you go. So I can see your name now. Grant, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with what you're saying, especially about social media. Although one thing I have found myself personally, I've recently joined a community of like-minded people that, to be honest, I would never have found them without social media. So whilst there is a lot of negativity associated with social media, especially with instant gratification, people having FOMO, feeling like, oh, they've got this, I want that, but really it's unrealistic and it's unattainable for the majority of people, especially when they're following Cristiano Ronaldo and, you know, Rihanna and the likewise. We're setting ourselves up to fail, essentially, until we find ourselves a community. And the thing is, now you're not going out at the weekend, going to your clubs and you're going to your social events or you're going to the pub or whatever to mingle and mix with people. Now you are going on Facebook, you're going on Instagram, and people are spending more and more time online. So I feel like people need to, instead of just scrolling, they need to find like-minded people that they would do normally.
Grant, there's some really good points there. I'm not here saying that social media is a bad thing. I'm not here to say technology is a bad thing. But we are masters of that technology. Most of us, sadly, are slaves to our technology. You know, Instagram tells you to buy something, I'll order it now. You know, I'm looking for the likes and the kind of responses as gratification for how I'm feeling. And if I don't get the likes and the feedback, then I'm going to feel miserable. Now, ultimately, you know, I used to joke that there's an off button on the side of a phone. But most people never use it. It's the shiny button that's never been used. In fact, I can't make that joke anymore because iPhone actually got rid of the off button. You have to press a couple of buttons and swipe and go through a series of motions just to turn the damn phone off because they don't want you to turn it off. So this is the interesting thing is, yes, if you are in control and you are a master of that technology and it works for you and serves you, but you're able to disconnect from it with no reaction, great. But if you feel anxiety when your phone's out of battery or you don't have it with you or you're not getting the feedback or the responses or reaction, then we know there's a concern. And this, for me, is a concern. That we also know that these companies employ behavioral psychologists to make their technology more addictive. Now, this is the thing, is responsible use, great. And for you, if you can use the platforms, and for anyone else listening, to connect to communities that you can meet up with in person, amazing. That's a responsible way to use this technology, and this is obviously what we should be encouraging.
it's exactly like McDonald's, isn't it? In fast food, they put sugar and salt in their food to make it more addictive, so they know you're going to go back. And
Absolutely.
it is exactly the same.
Absolutely. And you know, if the technology can facilitate opportunities for you to create connections so you don't feel lonely, great. But the technology is not going to fulfill the kind of desire to fill the loneliness gap. Does that make sense? It's just it's a connecting tool. So that's great. That's a really good shit.
Like you say, it's a tool, isn't it? And it's how you use it. It's neither good nor bad. It is just a tool.
Absolutely. You know, that's a good point. It's not good nor bad. It's the way we use it. So loneliness is the physical absence of other people. It's the sense you're not sharing anything that matters with anyone else, where we feel that there's not people out there that have got our backs, or people whose backs that we have got. Joe, what's your perception on this, the kind of connection between poor mental health and suicidality and the kind of sense of disconnection and isolation?
I think also to touch on the social media, so I know we've moved on. I also don't see it as bad or good, but I think you've got to be in a certain place to be able to be on social media. Look, when I experience, and I do go through bouts of it again, I'm not a recovered addict. It's not that I'm perfect, nothing like that. But there was a time where it was very, very acute and I wanted to exit the world. And at that time, I deactivated all my social media because it, again, the comparison was it. Although I'd perceived a certain situation as this person's made it, whatever, I internalized it on myself. And I was like, you're not good enough because you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And at that moment in time, my brain wasn't well enough to think in a certain way to straighten itself. So, yeah, back to loneliness. I distinctly remember I've also had an attempt on my life, and you know, I've been on suicide watch in NHS hospitals, and the feeling that I get is no one understands. You know, I'm different. I've heard this and I've heard that and I've seen this, but the thing is, I'm different. I'm alone. And again, I've had all the comment, you know, the standards, like you said before, Neil. You know, pull your socks up, or how can you be alone when you've got your family? I'm like, because you don't get it. You don't get inside. I just feel a disconnect between myself and the world. I didn't ask to be here. I don't want to be here. It's, you know, this world is just not for me. And I think when the more you engage in that, and the stronger those feelings are, it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And I think that the connection of that level of loneliness to suicide personally is quite high. Because, yeah.
And the stats are on the screen. Chronic loneliness is now classified as a mental health condition, and it's something that the government took so seriously as a result of some research we were involved with in 2018. That at that point, Britain, for the first time in our history, appointed a loneliness minister. So I didn't make that up. Britain actually has a government minister responsible for loneliness because we recognised it was such a severe issue. At that point. And this is in 2018, they suggested by 2023, the year we're in now, this is obviously a 5-year prediction, more than a third of the British population would experience chronic loneliness. That actually happened in 2020. Obviously, it was brought forward by the effects of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown. Now it's suggesting almost half of UK adults are experiencing chronic loneliness at least sometimes. So this is a pretty universal issue, and as Joey said, Joey, you stated that as an assumption. Your assumption is correct. The data supports that. People that experience chronic loneliness have a significant increased risk of suicide or suicide ideation. I go back to the blue zones, the areas in the world where people typically live to 100 years of age, and these places include places like Papua New Guinea and some of the Amazonian cultures and northern Himalayas, and there's certain places in Japan and places in Europe that are still living quite traditional sort of lifestyles where they have low to no instance of mental health and suicidality. How is it that they are able to avoid an issue that is plaguing other parts of Western society? Because they have something we don't: community. There is a direct correlation over the last 60 years and the degradation of community and the increase of suicidality and mental health issues. And many of us in big cities are walking around feeling very, very isolated because we don't need our community. When I was a kid, I grew up in Kingston upon Thames, and you could literally, you go into the same bakers, the same greengrocers. I used to go with my granddad shopping, and he would talk to the person selling them the fruits and vegetables or the loaf of bread. And they knew each other and they were friends. My granddad would go to the same pub. Sometimes he'd take him with me, and I'd have, a lemonade and a bag of crisps, and he'd sit there talking to his friends. People don't do that anymore. So this is something that, as I said, we need to consider. If we tackle the loneliness issue, we're automatically starting to prevent people, going on the decline that could lead to further, more serious impact to their mental and emotional health. And this research is from a 2022 report. The figures, sadly, are getting worse, not better. And the health risks of loneliness, it affects your physical and mental health, comparable to obesity and smoking. Now, because you can't see it in the same way as obesity and smoking, we don't really take it as seriously as we should, but it can kill you. So being able to live in a sense of community where people are around you, well, there's some things there on the screen as to what that can do for you. Joey, question for you, and also to everyone that's with us today. How has being a part of a community, there are people today have spoken about, having people around them that has been part of their support network. Grant mentioned using Facebook to connect with communities and how that was important for him. Joe, what's your take on this, as having people around you as your support network, and how that can massively improve your mental and emotional well-being?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important. I think the more you dig into a community as well, the more you realize, yes, there's a lot of shit and bad people in the world, but actually there's also a lot of good people, and a lot of people that are willing to help and do things for you that you would never even dream of. And I think, again, the expectation, I wouldn't mistake necessarily community as friends. What I mean by that is, when I was in a very, very acute phase, I was at the end of my life, I was incommunicado, I didn't speak, I would have done something like this in a million years. My expectation was, it's my best friends that should help me, it's my family. However, what I found, actually complete strangers helped me a lot more. And at the time, I felt a certain way about that, but you just realize that every different person has a different level and desire and capacity to give. But you will be surprised within the community how many people want to help. But the other thing which just to touch on isn't necessarily about community, but kind of stresses the point, is I've done a lot of group therapy over the years, and I've also done a lot of one-on-one therapy. But what really helped me in the group therapy and in those environments where there are people around you that you can talk to was the identification process. So before I went into the group therapy, I was on that slippery slope of loneliness, and that leads to isolation, and that leads to a lot of thoughts going on in my head about what's actually going on in the world compared to what's going on inside me. And again, it was the whole world's amazing, I'm awful, I'm a piece of crap, and blah blah blah, and I don't deserve to be here. And when I was in that scenario where you get identification with others, it's not that I take any pleasure from hearing other people's trauma, because I absolutely don't, but it was the identification process that, do you know what, actually other people experience what you experience. Yeah, and it's a bit like physical illness. You'll go to the doctor and think, oh my God, I've come home and I've got such and such, or I've seen things in this group about on the chat, challenges, and you'll see other people have the same challenges, and other people have those physical illnesses. And when you delve into it, there is a lot of resource out there. So yeah, I think community is absolutely key.
And it's a really great point you've raised there. Community isn't always necessarily friends and family, and it could be, but there are other ways to kind of be able to build and connect with community. And part of this starts with, well, how are we interacting and engaging with each other? We can start that process of building connection and building community at the point we start a conversation. What is the most common phrase used to start a conversation pretty much anywhere on the planet in any language?
Hello, well, you're all right, mate.
You're all right, mate? Yeah. Hello. But you know, what's the question that follows the hello? How are you? Thank you, Emma. Or you know, in Grant's words, you all right, mate? Which could be a question or a statement. How are you? ¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo se va? You know, again, translate it to ni hao, whatever language you want to translate into. It's pretty much how we start a conversation. The most bullshit question you can ever ask anyone. Why? Why is it such a BS question?
Because everybody will be like, yeah, I'm all right. Nobody actually ever tells you the truth.
Totally, Grant. Yeah. And it's interesting, Grant. You say, like, yeah, I'm all right, mate. Actually, you know, typical British responses are can't complain. So you just complain by saying you can't complain. I'm not bad. So, well, you're not bad. Well,
but you're not good.
What are you then? Someone recently said to me, I'm surviving. I was like, okay, you've been in a nuclear holocaust or something, or you know, what's causing you to just survive? You're being hunted by a rabid dog. I was in Dubai 2 weeks ago for work, and a client that I've been working with many years. I said, how are you? And he said, I'm still alive. And I was like, what? You got terminal disease? There's something going on? He's like, well, no. He was worried that I was shocked. And I was like, well, you just said you're alive. You know, my interpretation of that is there's something that potentially could have caused you not to be alive. But these are the things that we've got comfortable saying. My standard default response is wonderful, right? There are times where I'm absolutely terrible, but I used to say I'm wonderful because I'm Neil from the Stress Mountain Side. People expect me to be wonderful. But we're not authentic. We're not honest. Joey, what's your take on this? The how are you? The classic how are you question.
Yeah, you've touched on a big thing for me here. So I'm actually very facetious as an individual because I like to do a lot of tests on human behaviour, and I walk into shops where they, again, standard, how are you? With a smile on my face, I say, I'm really awful, genuinely, thank you. And they're sort of taken, you know, they're taken back and they're like, I don't, and I'm like, and they're like, you know, some people stop and they say, really, so, no, honestly, I'm absolutely dreadful. I feel suicidal. I'm genuinely awful. And it is an interesting point. Yeah, okay, I'm being a dick. I get that. And it's not fair on that particular person. But the point is, you know, it highlights the stigma, number one. They still don't know what to say. Number two, are we expecting an average person in the street to help us? They don't know us. However, sometimes they're the people that help most. So again, interesting topic. But the other thing, whilst I agree generally that it's a throwaway question, I think someone put in the group, you know, people don't listen to your reply. Completely and utterly agree. However, one thing that I think is unbelievably powerful and is so small to do is asking twice. So you get the bullshit answer first, but then the second one, if you actually stop, look someone directly in the eye, say, John, how are you? No, but how are you actually doing? What's going on? I find that leading question to open up actually is golden.
Absolutely. And Joe, you've stolen my thunder, and I appreciate that. That's great. And no, not at all. We were involved with a campaign which was originally run by an organisation that don't exist anymore. I can't remember the name for the life of me, but it was called #AskTwice. You ask the same question again, what you're saying to the person. I actually really want to know how you are. And I'm not expecting any of you to be counsellor or therapist. All I'm asking you is just to listen with empathy. And if I did come across someone like Joey, whether he's being facetious or not and saying I'm awful, I'm really struggling with mental health, it's like, okay, I'm here. I'm willing to listen and hold space. What do you need? How can I support you? And if I don't have the answer, how can we work together to get you the support you need? Or have you thought about contacting Samaritans or whatever? That, for me, could change the course of that person's day. Our mutual friend that connected us, Johnny Benjamin, was standing on Waterloo Bridge about to take his own life. Rush hour, 200 people walked past. He was there in a hospital gown with his bum on show, one of those hospital gowns with the back open, and people just walked past, standing there barefoot in November on a freezing cold day, and people just turned and looked the other way. It's the one person that stopped and said, "You're right, mate, how are you? Let's have a chat," which ended up being the story that made Johnny famous and has resulted in helping millions of people. And the book was called Stranger on the Bridge, because it was that stranger that was willing to take the time to stop and have a conversation is the reason that Johnny's still here. It's the reason I'm here having this call with Joey, because Johnny actually connected the both of us. So what I'm saying is being able to ask that question and hold space for the answer, even if you don't know what to do with it. And I'm not expecting anyone to have the answers to fix the person, but let's just get better at listening to each other and being authentic and showing empathy. Empathy is only trying to see things from someone else's perspective, not pity, not sympathy, but just, I'm going to hold space for you with empathy, with compassion, and with love. And that's really where we're going to change the how are you to, you know, how's your day going, or how are you feeling, or, you know, just ask the same question again, so we can create those better connections, so we can start ensuring that people feel there are people out there in the world, whether it be a random stranger or someone they know, that actually just really genuinely does care, which could literally change the course of someone's day, or, for example, in Johnny's case, change the course of his life. Connections mean that we are less likely to get ill, it reduces the risk of depression, you know, potentially is going to prevent someone from getting to the point where they no longer want to be here. But also, you know, as I said, we're not expecting anyone here to be counselors or therapists. We appreciate you investing your most valuable resource, your time, in being here today. But all we're asking is that, you know, we start doing our best to change the world one conversation at a time. If you need help and support, there are some resources there on the screen called the Samaritans. There's the campaign against living miserably. There's mine. There's the Silver Line. The information that has been here on this session, we are happy to share that with everyone that's attended here today. You will get a link to that put into the chat box and also emailed out to you as a result of attending. We do have other programs, public programs that are available. There's a program about financial well-being. Many of us are struggling with money, and that's a big cause of stress for us. And I know that can have a serious impact on our mental health. We do have a recording of this session as well. If you want to share that with any friends or colleagues, that's going to be on the website, which is on the screen in front of you. We'll again make sure that's put into the chat box. And there is on that page also information about our 10-step stress solution program. So just before we finish, Joey, any final comments, anything you'd like to share? How can people find out about you and the work that you do?
Thank you. Yeah, Instagram, Joey Kolirin, or joeykolirin.com is a funny spelling, but we can send that out after. I'll put it on the chat. Basically, the only thing I really want to say is actually I always find these talks very grounding and a reminder. And even though I'm in this field, when it comes to it, I'm thinking I've got a day job, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to, you know, I'll bail. I get all the same negativity in my own head that maybe some attendees have as well. Yeah, and again, there's no disrespect to the organisation or anything. That's me. It's turning up to life when it actually comes to it. There's excuses going on. You know, maybe I won't do this, and I cannot tell you how important it is for me anyway to stop. Whether I'm talking or receiving, you know, I've learned tons from Neil today and other people that have contributed, and it makes such a difference daily. But as someone put in the chat before, what you put in is what you get out. Very, very difficult to hear that when you're deep in a depression, because when I was deep depression, and I know it's a whole topic, but none of it was my fault, it was the depression. And it was actually very painful to hear people saying, well, you could do this, you could do that, and sometimes you're not able to. But when you are in a place where you're able to, if you can give, and it's even just listening, you can sit with your camera off, you don't have to do anything at all, camera off, don't have to speak, it's extremely grounding. So I really, really appreciate it. So yeah, again, thank you.
No, likewise, and I'm grateful for everyone that's shown up here today, for sharing your comments, your thoughts, your perspectives. I'm really, really grateful to Joe for being a part of this. If there's anything else you need, if there's any other questions, comments, feedback, I'm willing to stay on for a short while. If anyone wants to continue the discussion. In terms of the resources, I will get a colleague to put an email out to all of you with the link to the recording and the additional resources And if there are any more colleagues on the line now, if you could put that into the chat box as well, so people know where to find it, that would be amazing. So as I said, I will hang out for a few more minutes. If anyone's got anything like to share or discuss, I'm happy to continue the discussion. But otherwise, once again, thank you so much for attending, and see you back next month for our next session, which will be for World Mental Health Day.